in my book, I write about, one of the main things that undermines teacherly authority is what I call the educational commodity proposition. And the educational commodity proposition is basically the reducing of educational experience to something like a commodity, which can be quantified and monetized and put into market exchange dynamics. And what that does is it complicates the relationship between the teacher and the student, because the student is aware that, in fact, the teacher is getting paid by me to give me this lesson. And therefore, is this the lesson they would give if I weren't paying them? Right? And so this goes all the way back to the sophists and Socrates, where Socrates was like, hey, the sophists, like this group of philosophers who were basically working with the sons of aristocrats for pay, teaching the kids what the kids wanted to hear, basically. It's like, because if you're paying me to be a teacher, then it's in my interest not to challenge you, right? It's in my interest not to put you in a situation where you have to learn something that you don't want to learn. It's in my interest to be a lot more entertaining and to teach you things that will instantly give you return on your investment so that you can make more money, so that you can give that money to me, right? And so the one example of this is like the educational student loan. The whole student loan crisis actually is deeper than the financial thing. It's a huge financial problem, but it's also that running higher education on a debt-based model where you're basically taking out the equivalent like a mortgage on a house in order to go to college puts every student in the classroom sitting there looking at the professor, looking at their watch, being like, how much money is this minute of instruction costing me? Will the loan that I've taken out to be in this classroom, are you teaching me something that will help me repay this loan, right? Am I getting return on investment in this educational relationship? Because I have to, because I just invested a lot. And then it changes the dynamic of colleges, because colleges become more like interested in serving customers than in educating students, right? And of course, we know classic capitalist saying the customer is always right. So, and yet, if you're a student, you actually want to be proven wrong, right? So this is like a very, and it's like subtle, but it's actually deep in the way we think about education now. And it characterizes the cultures in colleges and universities a lot. And I think explains a lot of the entitlement of younger people in these classrooms, just because they're paying 70, 80 grand to be there. And I'm paying 70, 80 grand to be there. And you're up here at the podium telling me some stuff that I fundamentally don't want to hear and disagree with. Like, I'm paying your salary. How dare you? And similarly with the online courses and spiritual teacher scene, if you are supporting yourself financially by selling courses, then that's going to affect the type of course, like that's going to affect what you teach, right? You become almost financially required to make these things palatable, entertaining, not challenging. And so like at the end of the course, you ask the students not what did you learn or how much did you struggle or how hard was it for you, but how much did you enjoy it? Would you come back, basically? So the educational commodity proposition fundamentally undermines the dynamic of teacherly authority. It's kind of like saying that love, you can't put a price tag on love, right? Like, would you be my teacher if I wasn't paying you? Right? It's kind of like asking, would you be my mother if the state wasn't paying you to be my mother? Now, of course, the state doesn't pay anyone to do the duties of mother, right? But people talk about that, which is interesting. But it's a slippery slope towards a society in which we have bureaucratically eliminated the spontaneity of love, right? Bureaucratically eliminate the spontaneity of love by basically reimbursing people for doing behaviors that appear to be like love, right? And then the kid's sitting there like, okay, does she actually love me? Or is she acting like she loves me in order to get paid by the state. And so similarly with the teacher, does the teacher really care about my learning? Or do they just care about it because they're getting paid to? And even if it's some complex mixture, fundamentally different than the truly organic relationship of teacherly authority, where there is no market transaction that's mediating the relationship, right? And so that is key to get. And so most of the online educational offerings right now are just the educational commodity proposition just reaches right through all of them into the heart of the content and the way these things are working. And yeah, I see it as probably the largest challenge that we face now, is finding a way to decouple teacherly authority from basically commodity transaction. If, again, and I think spiritual teachers may be the clearest place to see this, it's like, if you need to fill this workshop to pay your bills, then you can't teach the most challenging workshop, right? You can't even risk becoming controversial. You can't risk becoming controversial. You have to stay in the kind of mainstream, marketable kind of dynamics of the culture and not deviate from that in order to not lose your revenue stream as a teacher. And by the way, you probably have to advertise through Facebook and make all other kinds of compromises in order to keep that flowing. And so that is deep. It's deep, and it's a subspecies of a broader problem that we're confronting with kind of the late capitalist endgame here, which is the attempt to just commodify everything, to just turn everything possible into a commodity. So this same problem also affects artists and artistic production, right? It's kind of we all know that the best art occurs when you're poor and not getting paid for it. You're doing it for the love of it. And then as soon as you break through and you become famous and popular, why are they doing the art? Why did they write that song? Did that song come from the depth of their heart? Or was it actually written for them by a group that has been monitoring public perceptions of songs, and it's actually been designed by marketers to become a popular song, right? Which is how the music industry works. Literally engineering binaural beats and other things to just addict people to certain types of music. And therefore it's not spontaneous, heartfelt artistic expression. It is strategically made commodity to sell. And so that's tough. And that's why there's actually a premium. It's actually hard to find. But when you find it, it's amazing. When you find a true teacher, you find a true artist, because somehow they're doing this outside of that, or they're doing it inside of that, but they've somehow blown up that context so that it doesn't even apply, So that is part of what becomes essential for children to understand, especially in homeschooling contexts and as they get older, that no, there are certain types of adults who will help you no matter what. They're not going to get paid, right? They're not going to get rewarded by the culture, but they love you. They will help you no matter what, right? And that is a message of unconditional support, a message of the unconditional availability of educational resources, right? Which is what needs to be given to kids, that so that they can feel empowered to rise to the challenge that they have, that they'll be supported. And that's generally not the one given. I can't tell you at what age anxiety begins about paying for college, but quite young in many families, not in all families, of course, but in many families. It's one of the most fundamental things that characterizes the entire educational experience of the kid. Where will I go to college? Will I get a scholarship? Can I pay for it? You're in a zero-sum competition with other students in high school, all the way up to that moment when you, it's one of the most competitive environments, kind of cutthroat competitive environments some people are ever in, is the college admissions process, right? What a crazy message to send, right? to children that basically like, no, you're not supposed to collaborate with people your age. You're supposed to be in a cutthroat competition with the people your age for scarce resources to educational opportunity. Right? It's like, oh, how are they going to then learn to collaborate when they become adults? When the most fundamental lesson you've taught them at this most formative age of adolescence is that they're fundamentally at odds with their classmates, that they're fundamentally in a cutthroat competition with their classmates with like a zero-sum outcome, right? Like there's only 1 or 2 scholarships. If you don't get a scholarship, you don't go to college, right? Like we are neck and neck competing over our own futures as 15, 16, 17-year-olds. And we just take that for granted, that's like a crazy kind of initiation into our dog-eat-dog capitalist culture, that the kids just need to get used to being at each other's throats and doing whatever it takes to get ahead, and to not having compassion for their classmates, and to just like all of that stuff is just built in there. And that's all tied into the education commodity proposition fundamentally. And then the final thing I'll say there is that testing. The first book I wrote was on standardized testing. And that's where I came up with the notion of the education commodity proposition, because that's the main impetus behind testing, is the ability to actually put a number on the amount of education that has transpired so that we can prove that we have a return on investment. Like that's the whole idea. Like, okay, we put this much tax money into the schools. If we put that much tax money in, there needs to be some comparable number that gets spit out by the system that proves to us that that money went somewhere that was useful. And so the tendency towards quantifying educational experience, which means towards monitoring and measuring learning, and specifically measuring learning with standardized tests to aid us in decision-making procedures about investing money, where the skills and capacities of the students are basically turned into objects for cost-benefit analysis calculations by standardized testing. Right? So I'm not saying that's a completely wrong way to think, but I'm saying if that's the only way one thinks about the quality of what's occurring in a school, then you're deeply, deeply confused. And so you have to see the relationship between the commodification of everything as related to the tendency towards the measuring and quantification of everything, and therefore the monetization of everything. So that's just kind of more reflections on that. So, this is why guild models, collaborative or collective models, co-op models, those types of models create social containers where you can avoid having overriding dominance of the educational commodity proposition. And those are structures where there's a shared investment by everyone in the thing that's being created, as opposed to like you coming from the outside, paying for access, hanging out there for a bit and leaving. And then this thing makes more and more money as more people do that. Like it's a business model. You can't run education on a business model. I mean, you can, but then it's not education. It's actually something else. It's either propaganda or entertainment, probably. But if you have a co-op type model or collaborative or collectivist model or a guild-like model, then you have a different relationship between the students and the environment that they're in. And it's not that there isn't money being exchanged, but it's that the fundamental relationships involved are insulated from the dynamics of that commodity exchange process. So there's more to say about that. It's a complex issue, and it just shows that education as a topic includes everything. It includes ethics, it includes psychology, it includes economics, it includes politics. Like it's all in education, and that's, I think, important to grasp as we move out of this era of schooling, which we've still got another decade or so if we're still around in a decade. But, in 20 years, there won't be anything that look like what we know of as schools, I believe.